joining us for today's Vinci Services Cyber Seminar. Today's session is Navigating CDW Data. Today's presenter is Brian Robison. He's an assistant manager with Vinci Data Services. Brian, can I turn things over to you?
Yes, thank you. So thank you for joining us today, everyone. Today, as you've just heard, I'll be presenting on navigating CDW data. So let's go ahead and get started. So for my agenda today, this is just an overview of what I'd like to cover. So first, I'd like to cover the VA CDW data sources. I'd like to cover how you can find research variables of interest, and I'd like to cover helping understand patient identifiers in the VA data. So I'll start with the VA data sources, and of course there are many of these, and I will do a very quick fly-through of all of them. So first, I just want to set some expectations overall for this presentation. So what will this presentation have? What it will have is a very high-level bird's eye view even of CDW and other data. And I will also provide a bunch of helpful links in the references at the end. This presentation will unfortunately not have a look at the actual data itself that contains PII, and it can't be shared in this forum. It will not have SQL scripts or other examples on how you actually use this data, but I do link the Vinci Services team SOPs, which do provide those SQL scripts and help on how to use those. And I also will not be getting into Cerner data. The reasons for this is many of the various domains I cover in a single slide, I could spend an entire hour talking about just that domain. So of necessity for time, and the fact that this is just a brief overview will necessitate that it's going to be very quick. It's going to be a fire hose of information, and I'm going to be throwing a lot at you. But again, I do provide a bunch of links in the references and throughout the slides. And so these slides will be available with those links. And the Vinci Services team is also always happy to answer any questions. So as you dig into those links and the documentation and sources I provide and you still have questions, please reach out to us. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So first I'll start with the actual CDW data itself. So this consists of the CDW production and CDW raw data. The data resides in CDW work databases on Vinci servers. This is production data that has been standardized. It has been reviewed by clinical subject matter experts. The data is categorized into both DIM or reference and fact tables. And the distinction here is that anything that is a DIM table will be, like it says, any kind of reference data or metadata or kind of, information that way. And then the fact tables where the actual patient data is. The data here will combine multiple Vista files into a single view many times. And then SIDs or station identifiers are added by CDW to make your SQL joins easier. There are indexes that are added by CDW. There's documentation. It exists. It's not always great, but it's not horrible. Okay, and so like I mentioned, we have the dimension or DIM tables and NDIMs sometimes. So again, the dimension data does not contain any patient data. So that means that all of the dimension tables are made accessible to research studies, no matter what you've requested. They are located on the CDW Work database on all study database servers, and these DIM tables contain all kinds of information, including reference and lookup information, things like ICD diagnosis, procedure code numbers and definitions, drugs, drug names and drug classes, lab test names and specimen types, Vista sites and stations, visions and regions, descriptive information about other terms and items used in the VA healthcare data, and they can be used to efficiently identify patients for cohorts to select your data. And I'll show that a little bit when we get to identifying phenotypes and patient cohorts. And the NDIM specifically is the schema used where the dimension table is not actually sourced from a Vista system. So that's the difference between the DIM and the NDIM. All right, now I'm going to run through all the various domains that you can find in this CDW work data. So we'll start with ADR enrollment. So this domain contains data from the Enrollment System Administrative Data Repository. This includes information on veteran status, including enrollment status and priority group, and it contains these fact tables and these dim tables. The allergy domain, this contains allergy and adverse drug reaction information generated in the VA data. It includes information about hypersensitive reactions, including things like the medication, if it was a reaction to a medication, or the food, or the chemical, or the noxious stimuli. It also contains information about the type of reaction. So was it a rash? Was it something else? Those kinds of things. And it uses these fact and dim tables. The anticoag domain, or anticoagulation. So this pulls information that's a combination of VISTA file 130 and the anticoagulation management tool. Note that not all of the 130 VA facilities use this tool, so data will be missing from those facilities in this domain. It includes data on international normalized ratio and the indication for the anticoagulation treatment, and it uses this fact tables. And we have the appointment data. So this contains information about appointments, including the appointment date, the purpose of the appointment, the status of the appointment, if it was canceled, the reason why, and the staff member who canceled it, and it uses these fact and dim tables. We have the Benny Travel domain. This contains information on records of travel payments to patients and patient caregivers, and it uses these fact and dim tables. We have the consult domain. So this contains information on requests for services, including clinical specialty care, procedures, and non-VA care. And it uses these fact and dim tables. We have the COVID-19 shared data resource. So this is information related to COVID-19, both inside and outside of the VA. This was a collaborative effort, and it utilizes multiple data sources. This domain includes things like case definitions, concept definitions, the VA data mappings to these, and a whole bunch of other information related to COVID-19. And there are 33 fact tables and 7 dim tables here. We have the CPRS orders. So this contains the orders and requisitions made through the order entry option when you're using any CPRS package. So this will include things like lab orders, radiology orders, and medications, and it uses these fact tables. We have the clinical reminder parameters, or CRP domain, and this contains information on clinical reminders, including the taxonomy, the definitions, and the resolutions, and there are 19 fact tables here. We have the dental domain, which contains records of dental exams, including diagnoses, history, transactions, and procedures, things like basic hygiene data, restorative surgery, orthodontics, periodontics, and endodontics. There are 29 fact tables and 17 dim tables here. We have the emergency department software, or EDIS. And this includes data on patients as they're tracked in the emergency department through the emergency department integration software. And this includes patient arrivals, their disposition, departure, and the reason for the visit. And it uses these fact and dim tables. We have the health factors domain, and this contains information on over 3,000 different types of factors which may affect the health of specific patients. So some common health factors include things like tobacco use, alcohol use, and drug use. The usage of health factors can vary substantially by station, so it's not standardized across the entire VA. These health factors are often used along with clinical reminders, and the data itself uses mostly free text with all the pros and cons that come with that. And it uses just the one fact table and this dim table. Have immunizations. So the immunizations domain contains records of patient immunizations. The records can link to outpatient visits via the visit SID, and it uses this fact table and these dim tables. The inpatient domain. So this is generated from the inpatient VISTA patient treatment file 45, which contains all this information that's generated from admissions, treating specialty transfers, and PTF screen edits. This domain includes things like information on admissions, discharges, the surgical procedures performed during the stay, any ICD diagnosis or CPT procedures performed during the stay, including the primary, secondary, etc. ICD diagnoses during the stay, and the ward location. And these are the primary domain tables, and there are many more. The integrated billing domain contains data from bills generated on behalf of patients. So it's generated from the Vista file bill claim 399 and accounts receivable 430. And it includes these, there are 36 fact tables and 31 dim tables there. The lab accession domain pulls information on lab pathology data that comes in from Vista file 68, and it has these fact tables. The lab chemistry domain. So use of the patient lab chem table is CDW's recommended path when you want to get lab data for most patient analysis projects, because that table restricts the lab results to only those records that refer to human patients, and it filters out any administrative test, referral test, or research test records. These are the primary domain tables and the primary dim tables there. The lab order domain contains information on lab orders found in Vista file number 69, and it uses these fact and dim tables. The mental health assessment domain contains data collected during administration of specified instruments from the mental health test and survey file number 601.71, which are given to a patient on a specific date and time. Please note that some of the survey text data here includes hidden characters, things like tabs or carriage returns, and you can use the replace function along with some ASCII codes in SQL in order to identify and remove these to clean up that data as you query it. It also includes these fact and dim tables. The microbiology domain contains data of report level and organism antibiotic susceptibility level records. This includes etiologies involved in pathogenic microbiology. Much of this data is text-based, and so again, with all the pros and cons that come with that. And there are 15 fact tables and 2 dim tables. The Master Person Index, the MVI, or also known as the MPI. So this is a single master index of all veterans that are in the health administration. This acts to maintain and synchronize identities and demographic data for all of VA clients, veterans, and beneficiaries. This includes a patient ICN status to assist with identifying deactivated patient ICNs. And there are 4 fact tables and 11 dim tables in this domain. The non-VA medications. So this is a table which contains information about medications a patient has taken that were not prescribed or administered by the VA. It includes the date the medication was started, the date it was stopped, and date that it was entered into the VA system. It can include things like dosage, route, and schedule, and if possible, it's linked to a local drug SID or a CPRS order SID and or a pharmacy orderable item SID to identify the medication itself. The OMOP domain. So what the OMOP domain is this is actually a data model. And so what that is it means the CDW data itself has been transformed into a different data model, in this case, the OMOP data model. This is an international common data model that uses standard vocabularies. It standardizes the data to allow for easier data interchange between research projects. It includes information on conditions, procedures, device exposure, drug exposure, dose, and area. It involves measurements and observations. So the OMOP Common Data Model defines table structures for each of the data domains in a person and provider-centric model to try and allow for ease of research and sharing of data. The outpatient domain in CDW, this is the outpatient visit domain, and it replaced the old CDW encounter domain. Unlike the encounter tables, no records are filtered out of the outpatient domain, aside from any normal exclusion of records before October 1st of 1999. And this pulls data in from the Vista encounter file there and the Vista and other related files. You can find all Things outpatient here, including data on visits, any CPT procedures performed, any ICD diagnoses, and the workload logic. The primary domain tables are these ones. The pathology domain provides data from several pathology VISTA files, and this will include information on autopsies, cytopathology, and surgical pathology. And there are 69 fact tables and 2 dim tables here. And then we have the patient enrollment domain. So the data in the patient enrollment domain originates in the VISTA version of the VA enrollment data. So when a veteran goes to a VA medical center to enroll in care, information pertaining to their enrollment is stored in the local VISTA system, and then it's sent to the Health Eligibility Center, or HEC, for verification. The HEC's enrollment data is considered the authoritative source. So therefore, this VISTA enrollment data is synchronized with the HEC data once a determination is made, and there's a field in the data known as source of enrollment, which indicates whether or not this record has been synchronized. This domain contains information like enrollment status, the dates of enrollment period, severity of disability if they have one, whether the disability was rated service-connected, military discharge status, type and number of benefits being paid, the priority group, and other things. And it uses this fact table. Right, we have the PCOR. So this, like OMOP, is actually a different data model. So the data from CDW is transformed into this case, the PCOR, or Patient-Centered Clinical Research Network, common data model. Their data model prioritizes analytic functionality. Therefore, the data structure here may not be normalized. So for example, some fields may be duplicated across tables. We have the Pharmacy Barcode Medication Administration, or BCMA. So this domain is for medication administered during an inpatient setting. Information here includes dates and times that the medication was ordered, delivered, and administered, details of the medication like the drug name and dose, variance or deviation of the administration process. And these are the primary tables. The pharmacy outpatient domain includes all the outpatient pharmacy data, including administrative pharmacy services and info on the patients receiving prescriptions. So you will find things here like the fill date, the process date, the number of days supply, whether there were refills and renewals, etc. It includes specific drug information like the name of the drug or the VA drug class, and it uses these primary tables. We have the Program Integrity Tool, or PIT. So here you'll find data on VA claims for community care that's processed through PIT, including but not limited to choice claims. And there are 40 fact tables and 27 dim tables here. And then we have the Purchase Care Authorized, or fee, and this domain contains data on reimbursement of non-VA medical care from an external entity. So the information here includes things like the vendor, the reason for the visit, the dates of service, status of the reimbursement, the amount billed, the amount paid, the type of payment. It'll contain patient information such as diagnosis codes, the insurance, admission discharge dates, and dispositions. There are 12 fact tables and 9 dim tables here. We have the prosthetics domain. So this contains data on prosthetics and prosthetic purchasing transactions, and is pulled in from Vista File 660. There are 28 fact tables and 22 dim tables here. We have the radiology domain. So the administrative and clinical information here for radiology exams, orders, and reports. And there are actually 2 schemas here. There's the RAD schema, which it has the radiology fact tables, and then there are S-patient text schema tables, which contain radiology report text, notes, and written clinical histories. There are 20 fact tables and 21 dim tables here. We have the primary care management module. This uses the RPCMM and PCMM schemas. So this contains information from the primary care management module web application. So this includes things like the patient and staff assignments. So for example, a patient to primary care provider assignment, information on healthcare teams in the VA, and there are 13 fact tables and 8 dim tables. We have the RxIV domain. So this contains information on VA IV medication activity, things like renewals, label tracking, and comments from providers. It's generated from Vista File 55, and there are 7 fact tables and 2 dim tables here. We have the RxUD domain. So this is information on the VA Rx unit dose activity, includes drug dispensing and comments from providers. This is generated from Vista File 55 and has 7 fact tables. The S-patient and patient domains. So this domain contains information on all the patients followed by medical centers or outpatient clinics. So you'll find data here like things like demographics, age, race, ethnicity. You'll find sensitive patient data such as names, addresses, and the real social security number. You can find data on military service such as service-connected disabilities and periods of service. And these are the main tables. And the distinction here between the S and so we have the S patient and the patient. The S is for a little more sensitive data. So things like social security number and things of that nature will fall under the S patient schemas, whereas the patient schema, while it still has PII, is not as sensitive. And that's the same setup here for the staff and S staff domain. So same designation there, the extra S in the schema means that there's more sensitive information in those tables. And the staff domain here has information on the staff that is affiliated with the VA. So again, this can include stuff like PII data, including staff SSNs, and these are the primary domain tables here. The surgery domain, including pre, intra, and post. So this is data extracted from the surgery package. So the pre, intra, and post is a vertical split into these 3 conceptual groupings. So the pre groupings includes information on the surgical case scheduling and preparation. The intra is on that same surgery, will be data during the surgical case progression. And the post will be that same surgery, but the post-case data, like provider notes, indications for the operations, surgically implanted prosthetics. So each of these views has a surgery case identifier and a patient identifier and a date and time of the surgery location, etc. So you can track the same surgery across these 3 groupings, and it uses these primary tables. The text integration utility, or TIU domain. So this contains free text documents such as progress notes and consult reports. Note that the notes on Vinci are full text indexed to allow for better optimization with your searching. And we recommend you use the table value function, TIU full text search, when searching the full text keywords for best results. This data is pulled in from the Vista file TIU document 8925 and uses these tables. The view alert domain contains information on Vista alerts. So this includes things like whom was the recipient of the alert, the person that the alert was assigned to, and the parameters and display text of the alert itself. And there are 8 fact tables and 1 dim table here. The vital sign domain. So this contains vital sign data from all the VA sites, which is extracted from Vista file vital measurement 120.5. Note that there are no units of measurement for any of these vitals in the data. However, it's assumed that height is measured in inches, weight is in pounds, respiration is in breaths per minute, pain is from 1 to 10, pulse is in beats per minute, temperature in degrees Fahrenheit, etc. Or there are vital qualifiers, which record things like the arm from which the blood pressure was taken. And this is the primary domain table and the dim table. We have the women's health domain. So the women's health domain provides information from the women's health Vista files in the 790 range. The information in the domain contains administrative and clinical information pertaining to care for female veterans, and it uses these domain tables. Okay, now we're moving into the CDW raw data. So what's different about the CDW raw data? Well, the data here receives minimal processing. The goal is to get it out of Vista and into SQL. You should swim at your own risk because they're raw for a reason. Generally, you need to use the station and IEN to do your SQL joins with some exceptions. It's not really indexed here with some exceptions, and there is documentation, but you might be sorry you asked. Some of the data here includes echocardiogram, and the echo domain contains these echocardiogram procedures done on a patient. This doesn't include the echo reports. However, some of those results are located in the TIU notes, and the echo domain itself is a limited extract of these Vista files, among others. The oncology domain is a CDW raw domain that is a limited extract of the Vista oncology module. So this module automates the tumor registry and supports tumor registrars in abstracting cancer cases, following up on a cancer patient and producing the hospital annual report. And then we have non-CDW data. So this data contains highly refined data sets that are based upon Vista and other data sources. This data is usually very clean. It tends to be denormalized or flat and not relational. Mainly, the patient identifier used is the scrambled social security number, but sometimes it's the patient ICN. Typically, these tables tend to predate the concept of CDW. They tend to be intended for very specific business needs, so they are very focused. There's some demographic information in here, but it's usually not complete, and this data is reasonably well documented. Data examples in here include the PSSG, or Planning Systems Support Group, geocoded enrollee files. So these are groups of quarterly data sets comprising detailed and extensive geographic address information. This data contains one record per enrollee. So Vinci receives these as SAS files, and the data is then loaded into SQL Server for research access. And one of the popular things in here is it includes data on patient addresses, including drive times. We have the VASQUIP data, or VA Surgical Quality Improvement Program. So this data is produced by the VHA National Surgery Office. It includes surgical outcome data, including morbidity and mortality information, and it includes data on the quality of processes and structures of surgical care. And then we have other data. So this is data that's based upon CDW data, but not formally produced or managed by CDW. The documentation here can be hit and miss. We'll frequently use patient ICN or scrambled social as the main patient identifier, and the indexing as well is kind of hit and miss. Data here includes the Care Assessment Need, or CAN score. So the CAN score reflects the estimated probability of hospital admission or death within a specified time frame of 90 days or 1 year. The score is expressed as a percentile ranging from 0, the lowest risk, to 99, the highest, compared to other VA patients. And the data used to generate the score is obtained from VHA administrative databases. We have the Da Vinci data. So the Da Vinci data is a Department of Defense and VA Vinci data integration effort. So this includes collaboration between the two agencies and resource sharing. And the end goal here is to take military health system data from the DoD and service-related information and make that available within Vinci. So this includes data on healthcare events, historical beneficiary data, service-related information, and demographics. We have the left ventricular ejection fraction, or LVEF data. So this domain contains information on LVEF measurements extracted using natural language processing. So the LVEF is the total amount of blood in the left ventricle that's pumped out with each heartbeat. So this measurement is provided in a range value. So the data set separates the lower and upper values of each range that a patient received. And this data is available from Vinci upon request. We have the Patient Aligned Care Team, or PACT. So this is VHA's implementation of the patient-centered medical home model, which aims to improve health outcomes through team-based care and improve access and care management. There are composite scores that are constructed for 8 core domains, so access, continuity, care coordination, comprehensiveness, self-management support, patient-centered care and communication, shared decision-making, and team-based care. The main outcomes and measures are patient satisfaction, rates of hospitalization and emergency department use, and quality of care and staff burnout. All right, so now we're going to move on to how you can help find research variables of interest or identify cohorts of interest. So don't jump into the documentation. So there's all kinds of documentation available, and we'll go through how to get to many of these. So you can use, starting off with the Bissell metadata report. And I would love to be able to pull these up and show live demonstrations of them, but sadly I'm not actually in the VA network right now, and many of these you have to be on the VA intranet, so unfortunately we'll have to go with my screenshots here, but I do provide the links so you can get to these pages yourself and really dig into them. But these are all useful tools, and I'm just showing some examples of kind of how they would work. So for this one, this provides from Bissell the entire metadata for data in CDW. So for example, let's say I'm interested in the women's health domain. So you can see here when I pulled it up, I found the women's health domain and selected it. And what pulls up is it shows me all of the various tables, both DIM and fact tables, that fall under this domain. And I can drill through. So this is just a Power BI report. I can drill through and find, okay, how do these tables link together? What's actually in these tables, all the different fields and everything. So this is a very useful tool to start with if you're diving into CDW data. Next, we have the Vinci Metadata Viewer. So what this is this is a tool that's provided by Vinci. So you can access this outside of the Vinci space. It's through the Vinci homepage. I provide the link here. And what this tool does is allow you to search the metadata as well, and you can use keyword searches here. So for my example here, let's say I'm interested in CPT codes. I want to know where is CPT codes going to show up in the data. So I've searched for CPT, and I see, oh, okay, here, it looks like in the schemas we have INPAT, so I'm interested in inpatient procedures. And it will show me the view here that contains inpatient CPT procedures, and it pulls up here. You can see it. I have the field names and other information that pulls up. There's also the Vinci DIM Data Viewer as a potential tool. And so what this tool does is, like the other one, is allows you to use keyword searching. In this case, we're searching the actual DIM data. So remember, I've referenced a bunch the DIM tables that contains all of this information in them. You can actually search what's in those tables without even logging into the Vinci space or using SQL. You can just do it here if you'd like. So for example, let's say I'm interested in where I can find more information in the data on smoking. So I've done a keyword search for smoking. I've selected that I want it as a finding. And I remember that, oh, smoking was one of the more common health factors. So let's look at that one. And this actually shows me the actual health factors that contain the keyword smoking. Another great resource is Virex documentation page, and I've linked them here. Of particular interest for those of you newer to CDW would be to start with their Getting Started with CDW section. And then also their fact books are a fantastic resource where they really dive deep into these domains I presented on and provide documentation and resources. And the researcher's notebook, which provides commonly asked questions of how to do various research-related tasks within the VA data. Another resource is the meta view within the data itself. So here I've provided an example of when you're actually in SQL Server and you've been given access to the data, within CDW is this meta schema, which is information about the data itself. And so for those of you that have some SQL knowledge, you can go ahead and query these meta views to find out all sorts of things. So in my example here, I've queried looking for where can I find fields that contain ICD-9 in them. And so I've pulled that here, and you can see my query results show me the schema name, the view name, and the field name based on my search. So I found all these various places that I can find where the field name contains ICD-9. There's documentation for the CDW raw, and I've linked the SharePoint here. And so for my example, I'm interested in oncology. So I've navigated to the CDW raw documentation. I've selected oncology. And you can see, among other things here, it includes information on the actual Vista files and fields that are being pulled in from Vista into the oncology domain. We have, let's say you're interested in mortality data. So in the past, you would use the vital status. And here is a link to the vital status documentation. So you can see here, I have the link. And so you can pull it up. This will include things like documentation on the fields, how the data is pulled in, the sources of the data, etc. And note here that the vital status is actually in the process of being replaced by the death ascertainment file. And so the death ascertainment file, or DAF, I link the documentation here, and you can see the screenshot. And as you can see, it's in the process of replacing the vital status information. The expected timeline is sometime this year, so fiscal year 2023. And so you can come here to check out the fact book, check out the data dictionary, and more information about the death ascertainment file. And the mortality data moving forward is planned to be, this will be your source for any mortality data. And then OMOP. So I mentioned OMOP in my presentation. So this is the data model. And so what's interesting about OMOP is that things in the data are assigned a concept with a corresponding concept ID. So if you're looking for something, so in my example here, let's say I'm interested in diabetes. So where can I find information about diabetes inside the VA data? Well, I can search the OMOP concept table, and I can filter where the concept name has diabetes in it. And I want to filter further where it's diabetes as a condition as opposed to, say, diabetes medication. And you can see I get results here that show me, okay, there are ICD-10 codes that are associated with diabetes. So maybe I need to look into using ICD-10 codes to identify diabetes. And then there's the link here to the VHA data portal itself. So this is a fantastic resource for various data that can be found. Some of these I included in my presentation, and there are of course others. And so you can link here to really dive into the various data that's available in the VHA. All right. And so I also wanted to cover understanding patient identifiers. So I've been throwing out a bunch of identifiers so far. So let's dive in deeper a little bit to that for those of you that may be unfamiliar. So there are all kinds of data sources with all kinds of patient identifiers that all get pulled into what we nebulously call the Vinci data. So let's go through these. So first of all, we have the real Social Security number. So those of you familiar with a Social Security number, it usually has 9 digits. It can have leading zeros. If the Social Security number is not provided by a patient, then a pseudo Social Security number is assigned by the VISTA system, which will serve as a placeholder until the real Social Security number can be obtained. So this pseudo SSN is a 9-digit number that's generated by VISTA, followed by the character P. The pseudo SSN is not unique, and so the same pseudo SSN may be assigned to different patients. The SSNs may rarely contain other formats, for example, 10 digits, if the SSN was entered as such in VISTA. We also have the scrambled SSN, or SCRISN. So this is used as a replacement of the SSN in many VHA data sources for privacy and security reasons. So the scrambled SSN is generated by CDW as well as other VHA systems using the same algorithm. It's used to identify patients in some non-CDW domains, including MedSAS, DSS, Vital Status, and HERC. The scrambled SSN will be the same for a patient with a pseudo SSN as for a patient that does not have a pseudo SSN if the first 9 digits are the same between the real SSN and the pseudo SSN. The patient with the pseudo SSN has a P following the 9 digits of their SSN in the patient SSN field, but there is no P assigned to a scrambled SSN. Therefore, in some cases, the scrambled SSN may not be a unique identifier for a small number of patients. We have the STA3N, or station. So this is a 3-digit number representing the VISTA system where the data was entered. So when using raw data that's not had any processing and using any IEN, you must use the station as well to ensure uniqueness. So for example, you should match on both the patient IEN and the station. So the patient IEN is found in both the patient and S-patient tables. This is the internal entry number in a VISTA system for a patient. It is unique to a patient only in that VISTA system and not across all VISTA systems, so not across the entire VA. So again, when you're using raw data, you need to join on both the patient IEN and the station. So in my example here, I show what can happen if you don't. So we have John Smith was assigned the patient IEN of number 100 at station 438. We have Beth Adams, who was also assigned the patient IEN of 100, but at station 660. So if all we did were to join on patient IEN, we would accidentally be crossing John Smith with Beth Adams. And we have the patient CID. So the patient CID is the primary patient identifier for CDW production, the TIU, and some process raw data. It's the primary key in the patient and S-patient tables. It is generated by CDW for a unique combination of patient and VISTA system. So a patient may have more than one patient CID if they have information in more than one VISTA system. So for my example here, we have John Smith. He is seen at station 438 and is assigned patient IEN of 100 and is assigned a patient CID of 12345. Same John Smith goes to station 660 and is assigned a patient IEN of 250 and a patient CID there of 8888. So that leads us to the patient ICN. So the patient ICN can be found in both the patient and S-patient tables. This is used as the patient identifier for the CAN score domain. It is created by the Master Veteran Index, or MVI. This is not reused and is unique across patients, and all VHA systems include VISTA systems. Therefore, a patient should only have one ICN. So if a study requests data from a domain that uses scrambled social as a primary identifier, but does not want to have to go through the requirements of getting scrambled social access, the patient ICN can be substituted as an identifier. So how do some of these all tie together? So we have our Jonathan Smith as our example here. We can see he went to 3 different stations. So at each of those 3 different stations, he was assigned a patient CID, which identifies him at that station. We can see his social security number is the same across all of those. And that ties to the patient ICN. So again, the patient should only have a single patient ICN, which we have here for Jonathan. Now, a word of caution. Similarly named identifiers are not always the same thing and do not always match. For example, the patient CID from the patient domain is not the same thing as the PIT patient CID from the PIT domain. So please check your primary and foreign key relationships before you match. And then as mentioned, I have a bunch of references here at the end, so go ahead and get a copy of these slides so that you can have these references to dive into yourself as well. And as always, if you ever need anything, the services team and Vinci in general is always happy to help, so please send us an email at vinci@va.gov.
Great, thank you so much, Brian. We do have some great time for questions here, so for the audience, please submit those questions you have. Please use that Q&A screen in WebEx to submit your questions in, and we will go through them as they come in. The first question that we have here, I have a question about patient identifier in OMOP. Do we use patient SID or SSN?
Okay, so in OMOP specifically, the main identifier for your patient is going to be the person ID. And so this will be the main identifier for anything in the OMOP data itself. And it's similar to a patient ICN in that a patient, one patient to one person ID relationship. And so a patient should only have one person ID, and that person ID should, only identify a single patient.
Great, thank you. And I was hoping people would type really fast because that's the only question that we have right now. Oh, here we go. Is this data for in-house VA and community care?
Okay, so it sounds like that was probably about one of the specific domains, or is that just a general question of is that data available?
We'll see if they send in a clarifying statement there. We're getting a couple questions about the handouts. The link to the handout was included in the reminder that was sent out this morning. If you cannot find that handout, it will be available on the HSR&D website. We will be sending the direct link to that archive as soon as that is posted. The next question we have here, assuming approval is granted, what are the advantages of using SSN in a study over ICN?
That's a great question. The only advantage I can think of is if the research question you are doing requires that you use data where the SSN is the only identifier for that patient available. So for some data sources, the SSN is used as the identifier, so that would be the advantage of using it, assuming the regulatory is granted and all of that. So that would be the only advantage I can think of, is if it's the only way you can use that data. Otherwise, I can't really think of anything else.
Okay, thank you. And we did get a clarifier in from, find this here. Is this data for in-house VA and community care? And they sent in for community care ACC's SPW0.
Okay. I'm unfortunately not familiar with that, so I apologize. Maybe this will help. So the data available in CDW includes both, yes, all of the data from the VA healthcare system, and then also the VA pulls in a bunch of community care data. And the two main areas where you'll find that data is in the fee domain and the PIT domain. And there's actually been seminars here that, that's a topic we could spend a whole hour diving into the community care data and then some. So I would recommend you check some of those past seminars. I know there was recently a really great seminar on the community care data, how to navigate it, what's available. Hopefully that helps.
Great, thank you. The next question here. Is there a place to access information regarding wait times in the ED?
That is a great question. I do not know off the top of my head. Um, I don't recall if the EDIS domain that I mentioned, which tracks, pulls in data from the emergency department, if wait times are included in that or not. So I would start there. And if they're not, please reach out to us at the Vinci Services team, and we can dive into that and see if we can find it.
Great, thank you. Next question here. Where can I find the documentation for Millennium data?
Okay, so there's actually a lot there available. Um, I mentioned that I wasn't going to cover anything Millennium or Cerner today because that's a whole nother thing, and so there won't be any reference links really in what I've provided in my slides today. But I know that there's been a lot of ongoing effort for, providing documentation and learning about the Millennium data. And so if you could reach out to us, we can provide you what we have and point you in any direction and answer any more specific questions that we can.
Great, thank you. The next question here. We do incremental load from SPV database, but sometimes we find history is lost and data actually updated. Don't we keep all the history data in SPV database, specifically data in spatient.spatient?
Okay, so I believe SPV is operational. Um, and so I actually don't have as much personal experience with using those. So unfortunately, I can't answer that question. I apologize.
There is an email address on the page right now. We don't expect Brian to know everything, but if you send it into vinci@va.gov, there are additional resources that should be able to help everyone out with some of this stuff. Okay, next question here. Where can I find information on things like exposure to Agent Orange?
Okay, great question. So I know off the top of my head, there's a handful of places in the VA data where there are Agent Orange exposure flags. And so from memory here, I'm going with I am fairly confident that the outpatient domain contains one of those flags, and then the patient domain itself as well. So either the patient or S patient domains. So what you're looking for is Agent Orange exposure flag will be the field that you're probably interested in.
Great, thank you. The next question here are patient patient IEN and patient ICN, both unique.
Great question. So patient ICN is unique to a patient. So one patient should only have one patient ICN, and one patient ICN should only refer to one patient. And so let me see if I can back up here. I have a slide kind of showing that on the IEN. Okay, so here we go. Patient IEN, however, is not unique outside of the station where it is assigned. So, for example, more than one person can have the same patient IEN. So in this example we have John Smith and Beth Adams, and they've both been assigned the patient IEN of 100 in this, just fake example. And so when you're dealing with patient IEN, you should also use the station as well to match on. The patient ICN, however, is only one patient ICN should only identify one person.
Great, thank you. Next question here. Where is Medicare or Medicaid data?
Okay, great question. So Medicare or Medicaid data is actually provided by CMS, or I believe that's the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services. And so I know research projects have gotten that data. Um, and so I am not 100% on how you go about getting that data, but I know that CMS is the data stewards for that. So I would start in your Dart and check if you can request it through there. If not, please reach out at vinci@va.gov and those that are involved with Dart and getting access to the data can answer your questions further. I'm sorry, I don't know beyond that.
Honestly, Brian, we don't expect you to know everything. It's not a problem. Next question here. If we wanted to search data by ICD, is it better to search by ICD-9 or ICD-10 for the CDW data?
Okay, great question. So I would say it depends on the time frame that you're interested in. If you're only interested in more recent ICD diagnoses, then you would want to just use ICD-10. And if you're only interested in older diagnoses, then you'd want to use ICD-9. However, if you're interested in all time, then you're actually going to probably want to use both.
Right, thank you. Next question here. I have a question about matching patient identifiers between two different databases. When joining tables with Vinci from the registry database, what are the matching primary and foreign keys for the unique identifier? The registry doesn't contain SSN or PII, but includes the patient DOB, name, address, phone, and zip code.
Interesting. So I'm not familiar with that table off the top of my head, but it seems odd to me that we would have a table without some kind of identifier to allow you to jump, whether that's the patient SID or the patient ICN, are two of the more common ones, or even a scrambled social or something. Generally, when I'm trying to link patients across tables or domains, you start with whatever identifier you have. So whether that's the patient SID or the scrambled social or something, I'm not familiar with a table that doesn't have anything like that. So if that's your case, then that gets a bit trickier. But I would think there would hopefully be one there. And then if there is, then you can go from there. Generally, you go to the patient or S patient tables. Or if you're working in an ORD study, you should have been provided a crosswalk table. So there'll be your cohort crosswalk table is also something that's useful that will generally provide a crosswalk between the various patient identifiers.
Great, thank you. Let's see if we can get through one or two more questions here. Is there data regarding medication procurement financials in CDW?
That I'm not sure. I know there's potentially some information of that in the community care, but off the top of my head, I'm not familiar with anything in the VA data side itself on that. So I'm not sure.
Okay, that's fine. Next question. Is there a way to look for MVP participation flags and any specific cores of MVP like the lifestyle core from CDW work? I looked in BISL archives and didn't see anything.
Okay, so the MVP data is its own thing, where generally speaking, you can only access that data if you are approved through MVP. So you generally can't look up, for example, any kind of MVP data itself, or even whether a veteran is enrolled in the MVP program without first being approved through MVP and then being provided the MVP data itself on a approved project.
Okay, great. Thank you. And with that, we are at the top of the hour. We do have a few pending questions out here, but for those of you who we did not get to your question, please use that vinci@va.gov email address. You can submit your question in there and someone will get back to you. Right there, exactly. Brian, just want to check if you have any closing remarks you'd like to make as we close the session out.
So I'll just echo what you said there, Heidi. So if I wasn't able to answer your question, please reach out to us. I work with many great people, and we all know something, and so our knowledge base tends to cover a pretty wide area. So if I don't know, chances are somebody on my team does. So yeah, definitely always reach out and ask us if you need anything. If you have a question or if you need some help, we're here. We're happy to help. And again, I know that this was a fire hose of information and very, very brief. And many of these things I covered, we could spend a whole hour talking about just a single one of many of my slides. So if you need to know more and you have questions, about any of those particular ones, reach out to us and we're happy to help.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We really appreciate all the time that you put into preparing and presenting for today's session. For the audience, I'm going to close the meeting out in just a moment. When I do, you will be prompted with a feedback form. We would appreciate if you took a few moments to fill that out. Thank you everyone for joining us for today's HSR&D Cyber Seminar, and we look forward to seeing you at a future session. Thank you everyone.